Right. Hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And this is just a little attempt at spreading awareness and trying to do our bit. It's called Kalpafrix, uh, or the Tree of Life. And the reason I wanted to share these stories was that we are facing a time when we desperately need to understand our connection with nature and our connection with the universe. And hence, there are a few people who actively work towards finding that connection and ensuring that others can feel it too. So why not just, learn from them? So I have with me over here Miss Jasani. And I have to say that the way in which she speaks and explains concepts about a topic about her topic is just very passionate. It's very engaging, I must say, even to those little kids with a lot of questions in their minds. Uh, right, Janjri ma'am is the deputy director for Center for Environmental Research and Education. It's essentially an NGO that works to educate children and people relating to the environment and also conduct sustainability programs. Uh, as I spoke about earlier, she loves to teach and she is a guest lecturer at St. Xavier's College. She's also uh, given a guest talk at my school, the Jamna Nursery School. I was there and I loved it. Uh, yeah, so I'm sure that the passion which she possesses, it will rub off on all of us, and I really hope that happens. Thank you so much for coming, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Advaita, and thanks for that very nice introduction. I really did enjoy visiting your school and talking to the students. I think we had a really nice, lively conversation after my presentation. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that and for joining you on the podcast today. I think you set
Right.
the bar very high, so I hope this will be an interesting conversation.
I think it'll be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Great.
Right. So, there are many misconceptions relating to sustainability, the word and the usage of that word. More so what it means and what the term sustainability means. So I'd just like to ask you what is generally acceptable, what is generally accepted as sustainability, and what do you think of it? What do you think is the truth behind moving towards a future where we reduce our needs and are able to provide for others?
Thanks. Great question. Sustainability has become such a buzzword today. Everybody is using it. All the companies are using it. NGOs are using it. Governments are talking about it. But I think the meaning of it can really get lost. And I think one of the things we need to do is really understand what it means for us in terms of in terms of individual lives, and also what it means to us in terms of being part of a larger community. So traditionally, sustainability was defined as essentially managing your resources, managing the way you uh, reuse resources on Earth, so that they are sustained or maintained for future generations as well as for your own use. And that's a great definition. It kind of gives you an idea of what it means. It it helps you picture this idea of something being cyclical as opposed to linear. But my problem with this definition of sustainability is that it kind of is up in the air a little bit. And when you wake up Monday morning and decide, okay, today's the day I want to be sustainable, it doesn't really tell you what you need to do. So the way I like to think about sustainability, and we kind of talked about this in the presentation maybe, is to actually think about what is unsustainable. And what is unsustainable is basically interrupting Earth's natural cycles. Okay, so all life on Earth is completely dependent on natural cycles that happen all around us. As young people, we learn about the water cycle, the carbon dioxide cycle, the oxygen cycle. But beyond those, there's lots of other natural cycles that are happening around globally, each one of which there's a phosphorus cycle, the soil cycle, there's uh, carbon dioxide cycle, which, we kind of talked about when we were discussing climate change. All of these, the nutrition cycle that, how nutrients get cycled throughout the different webs of life, basically. All of this it's critical. We need it every day to survive. There's no way we would if they didn't exist. And what happens is when we make actions or we undertake actions that are unsustainable, those cycles get interrupted. So they can be interrupted because we put things into the environment that cannot be a part of that cycle. So a prime example would be something like plastic. Now, there aren't a lot of natural cycles that exist to break plastic down, which is why you will hear people talking about how you throw a plastic bag, it'll still be still be there 1,000 years from now, because there's no natural cycle to return those base components back to the earth so that they can be used again. Another big way in which we're unsustainable is by interrupting the way natural cycles work. And again, a really common example here is cutting down forests or cutting down trees, or even destroying any kind of ecosystem, because trees, forests, green habitats essentially contribute to multiple cycles: the water cycle, the oxygen cycle, the soil cycle. And when we remove those ecosystems, when we remove those trees, we interrupt the ability of Earth to be able to continue those cycles. So therefore, oxygen production may go down, or soil production may be decreased, or soil quality may decrease, or carbon dioxide levels will go up because the ability of Earth to store carbon gets reduced. And then finally, of course, there's sort of barriers that we create because of these interruptions to natural cycles. We not just create these environmental barriers, but we also create social barriers, which is why sustainability and social justice are things that go very much hand in hand. Because say, we put pollutants into the air, it's usually people in the poorest communities or the people who are most vulnerable that then have to face the consequences of those disruptions. If living in Mumbai, you'll notice that all of our landfills are situated where the poorest communities are living, and they're suffering the direct consequences of emissions and pollutants from those landfills, while the rest of us get to generate as much waste as we want and never have to see it again because it goes somewhere else. So these three things sort of, for me, encompass what it means to be unsustainable. So if we can avoid these three things, then that would mean figuring out a way to be sustainable. So for me, sustainability is a way to ensure that Earth's natural cycles can continue to exist in harmony with, human development. And that not only is that development in harmony with nature, but that it's also equitable and therefore offers everybody the same kinds of opportunities. And I think that's a good basis from which we can sort of understand sustainability.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. That explained a lot to me. Definitely. Like in
Sure.
school, when they teach about sustainability, sometimes I do notice that it's used in a wrong context, or the way in which they bring it about. I think it's a very interesting topic, but sometimes it gets a bit boring. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I get it.
Yeah. So when you're talking about natural cycles, I totally agree with you, but I was just wondering, what do you term as natural and what do you term as unnatural?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. And I think natural also is another word that gets used around, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of, connotations with it that aren't like, it can be used by marketing a lot to claim things are natural when they're not really. For me, natural cycles are basically cycles that existed on Earth before we were here, that we have no active part in playing, or where our part is equal to any other living thing or any other part of the ecosystems. It's not imbalanced in any sense. So so natural cycles are basically just ways nutrients and resources cycle through the earth in a way that's been happening for thousands and thousands, if not millions and millions of years, and then what is unnatural are changes that we have made to those natural cycles, either by inhibiting them or by putting materials into the environment that cannot be a part of the natural cycle. So I think that is how I would sort of define natural versus unnatural. Um, and that's purely in an environmental ecological perspective, right? It's not from the perspective other areas. So, for example, farmers and agriculture may have different definitions of natural and unnatural,
Right.
right? Because none of our food crops are technically natural, though they are all plants and we get all of our, nutrients of there. There's a lot of like chemicals and pesticides and insecticides that go into manufacturing them or producing them. So it's debatable whether you would want to call them natural, so to speak. And then there's lots of beauty products that people claim are natural. But what does that really mean? So those are things I would put aside in the conversation for right now. But when I'm talking about natural cycles, I mean purely from an ecological standpoint or an environmental standpoint. Yeah,
Yeah, thank you. That cleared things up for me also, because I've noticed that the concept of nature, it's highly subjective. Each person has a
it
different
is.
concept and a different understanding. And mine happens to be a bit different from what you were saying, but I understand your viewpoint and your standpoint. So, yeah, that cleared it out for me personally quite well.
Sure.
So, the way I see it, it's everything's natural. Every
Okay.
atom that exists on this planet, it's natural because it's just changing its form. It's changing the connections, the bonds that it's making, uh, where accordingly. But what would be termed, what other people call unnatural, for me would be a human intervention where there is a negative outcome coming because of certain human tendencies that say, let's say, for example, greed, to want to produce more, to want to get more money, which is also um, like an invention of humans. So something like that for me, that would be termed as what others call unnatural. And uh, yes, I do agree with you. The natural cycles that you were terming, uh, I think I like to think of it as the different systems of our Earth. Like if we think about our human body and we correlate it to the Earth is a living body. And so
Mhm.
the forests act as the respiratory system, I'd say, and so on and so forth. And let's say there's an industry that's causing affluence into the air or into the water. So when I was younger, I used to think that the earth is smoking, that uh, that there is some sort of chemical in the blood of the earth. So I don't know. That just helped me understand things a lot easier. So I'm just
No,
sharing.
I really do like that analogy. I can see how the human body could be related to the earth because we also have all of our natural cycles, right? Our body actually that way is amazing because it helps us breathe, it processes food,
An
it
ecosystem.
breaks down food and gives us energy, it removes toxins, from the body as well, as waste. So all of the things that the earth does, the human body does. I guess the only difference is that if left in an ideal scenario, the earth would continue to do that until sort of astrological or forces were to intervene. Like on its own, it would kind of continue unless there were like, things happening outside of the earth that influenced it. But right now, I guess the thing that's happening that's outside of the earth is us, that's influencing the earth's sort of natural cycles. Yeah.
It's got some cancerous cells, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. Or someone's giving you something that doesn't agree with your stomach, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Right. And this was this is something that I also face, and I'm also subject to this. I mean, I can't escape this, and when I say that, I mean to say that uh, people don't really understand the urgency of the situation right now. Right, living in a city like Mumbai, the rain is just increasing every year. There are more frequent floods and whatnot. But I'd say that there was once a time when I used to enjoy it because school used to be off, and now it gets troublesome. But we just don't think about what's going on actually. Um, I
Yeah.
was speaking to a professor from Azim Premji University, and he was telling that the carbon levels in the air across the world right now, they are so much higher than what is prescribed for normal life to exist. Right. I think it's somewhere around 400 or 440 something. I'm not an expert. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the figure was somewhere there, and it's actually a miracle that there is some sort of normalcy in some way to the way we're living right now. So, uh, if you could maybe give some tips so that we can understand the urgency, or be conscious about our decisions, because it it gets a bit tough, I'd say, personally.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying when you talk about the urgency, because it's so hard for people to make decisions because everything else seems more immediate, you know? And I think a really good example to think about as to why people don't see the urgency is, again, let's talk about the human body, you know? We all know that certain things are probably not good for us, you know, consuming a lot of processed foods, eating a lot of sugar for us. And similarly, we know the things that we're doing to the earth are not sustainable. They're not good for the earth. And because they're not good for the earth, they're also not good for our way of life as it exists right now. But yet, we are more interested in instant gratification, like eating that donut or having that pizza. And I'm just as guilty of it as everybody else, than thinking about the long term and thinking, oh, if I continue this down this road, I'm opening myself up to high cholesterol or heart disease or diabetes 30 or 40 years down the line. And the problem with a lot of environmental issues, especially things like climate change, is that while the impacts are being felt now, they're all gradual. So they're all happening slowly. And they're all happening over a period of time, just like an unhealthy diet, for example. And so we're only going to see the really critical impacts, you know, in 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 years. Um, and also they're happening slowly. So we keep adjusting to them over time. But there's only so far that you can keep adjusting. Like even with something like diabetes, there's only so far you can keep adjusting before it's going to cause some serious health impacts. You can only take so much medication. You can only last minute adjust your diet so much. Once the damage is done, it's done. And I think that's the problem with environmental issues is that we need people to recognize the urgency of it, even though the impacts are not seeming urgent at the moment. Like, you know, you're talking about rainfall and floods. Everybody in Bombay today has become sort of, uh, ready to accept that this is just the normal way of life. But if you had picked up somebody from 50 years ago and just suddenly put them into Bombay right now, they'd be in a state of shock because they wouldn't understand how there's been such a massive transition and they would not be able to adapt to it because they haven't been adapting to it for 50 years. And so I think that definitely is a challenge. Constant communication, of course, getting people aware through platforms like this and lots of others, I think is incredibly important. But the other thing I want to sort of say about awareness is while it's really, really important to ring that doomsday bell and say, look, something really needs to be done, and it does, because we're heading to an earth where, you know, we may not have enough water in the future. There will be wars over water. Any kind of food shortages that we're seeing today will likely be 50 to 100 times worse in the future. Um, in fact, I was just reading a horrible article recently about how in Namibia there's so much drought and such a huge food shortage that the government has actually given permission to hunt wildlife to feed the population. And that's the thing is we become so like numb to this kind of information today, but it's actually when you think about it, it's quite shocking. And these things are going to just get worse in the future. And so there is reason to ring a doomsday bell. But it's not enough just to ring the bell and then just, you know, put your hands up and they say there's nothing that I can do
Yeah.
as an individual because there's a lot that we can do, right? So awareness is, of course, just the first step. Taking individual actions is the next one. It's very, very important for us to do everything we can in an individual capacity to make sure we are reducing our slice of the pie, you know, and taking just what we need, not more. So reducing our energy consumption, reducing our plastic use, reducing how much we buy, reducing how much we throw away, sharing resources, buying things that are green. But individual action And this is where you can see how, how this thing has been progressing so slowly. Individual actions probably would have saved us if everybody got on board in the 1950s and 60s and 70s when environmentalists were first sort of ringing alarm bells. But today it's already too late.
Yeah.
Okay. So individual actions are incredibly important. They send a message to companies, they send a message to the government, and they set an example for people around us. But in terms of impact, they're definitely not enough. We need to move beyond individual actions, and we now need to address this at a community level. And that means taking on community projects. So it's not just, as a student, for example, it's not just about you saving electricity in your home, but it's about setting up an energy efficiency program, working with your school to say halve your school's electricity consumption, or working with your, if you're in a community, by housing society, working with a housing society to set up a waste recycling composting system so that less waste is going outside. And then it's also about engaging with local policymakers, and then finally even the government and companies, and pushing them to make decisions as consumers, as voters. I mean, when you're old enough to vote, um, that to prioritize environmental issues as part of their policy. Today, we're so hung up on things. I mean, they're important, but I'm seeing, how a big issue, policy issue in Mumbai is always, oh, potholes during the monsoons. Um, and in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, they're spending thousands and thousands and thousands of rupees on fixing potholes, but no one's talking about the massive sewage crisis that we have. But millions of liters of untreated sewage are going into our oceans and disrupting that ecosystem and producing greenhouse gas emissions. Um, these are the policy issues that we should be looking for, our political leaders and social leaders to be talking about. So, in terms of what I think we need to do to be sustainable, individual actions are important, but they're not enough. We now need to move beyond our comfort zone of just, individual actions which are easy to implement, and start working as a community and as voters and as citizens to move this forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So could we say that community action would be the third step to your what you were saying?
Yeah. I would definitely say community action, community activism, even maybe, in a positive sense. I don't mean like morchas and things, but community activism, like, coming together as a community to make certain
Every
things a priority. Yeah.
makes sense. Yes, totally. Yeah, I was just thinking about, how I'm blanking out, but I was thinking about how there are certain aspects of our society that fuel the climate crisis further, right? Like, let's say the constant need to produce more, constant need to earn more, or maybe I read an article about the people who clean the sewages in
Mm-hmm.
cities. So it is said that some people who do that in the interviews, they said that they do so when they are intoxicated because otherwise it's not possible for them to be going down there and sort of work in that environment. So, and it is dangerous. People can obviously develop, certain diseases over a long time. And uh, I also saw somewhere that when these people they go down to clean a sewer, first they look for a cockroach, and only once they see one, they go and approach it inside to be sure that there isn't that amount of
Mm.
chemicals inside. Uh, so what I'm getting
Interesting.
at is there are there are these I'd say human tendencies uh, that fuel that have historically fueled what we are seeing in mass right now, right? And we are like at a special point in the history of the world, I'd say, because we're seeing a drastic change in the climate of our planet caused by an organism on it, right? Maybe let's say one of the times that happened was uh, the ice ages and the asteroid that hit, which affected the dinosaur populations. but that was definitely not in the control of the dinosaurs. So yeah,
This
that
is in the control of our hands. Yeah.
the Anthropocene is it's pretty interesting, I'd say. That's a good term to use.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
And sorry, please do go ahead.
no, go ahead. Yeah. You were asking me something.
Uh, yes, I was just asking about how you gain this sort of connect with nature. It's something I like to ask everyone because it's always important to know where someone comes from to understand where they're going.
Yeah. I don't know. I want to give the sort of cliched answer and just say, because it is true. I think growing up, I used to go to my uncle's farm in Mulshi, and I loved it there. I was always a big animal lover as a kid as well. And so um, I just, you know, fell in fell in love with nature. It's such a cliche to say it, but I did. And have always been passionate about it since a young age. Um, I think maybe something that has been particularly instrumental in this journey, I think I mentioned it to you as well, is actually my second standard teacher, Miss Gitayan Rustam KT. She was an environmental activist when I was in school, but also my second standard teacher. And so we heard a lot of stories from her about um, the struggle that she was uh, going through, in terms of protecting her community. I won't go into the details, but essentially she was in a long battle to protect her community in Dhanu against a power plant that was coming up and being expanded. And she was such a great teacher, and she talked so passionately about the environment when I was that young age that, I was inspired by her. And then lo and behold, like 20, 25 years later, I started working with her and joined the nonprofit that she had started. Um, so she is definitely a big influence as to why I ended up in this space. Also, again, just the fact that I, just love being in nature, love being around nature. I'm a big fan of wildlife and a huge animal lover. So all of those things sort of play into it. There was no sort of aha moment, right?
There is no such thing.
Something that I should be doing with my life. I think it was a pretty gradual journey that just happened over time. But people around me, my family, were all definitely big influences as to why I'm here today. I also think it's a really good story to communicate two important things. One, that young people and children should be spending more time in nature, because I think if they do, they can help build that connection. And if you build that connection and have respect for nature, then it's the first step in making all the right decisions later on. If you're so disconnected from nature, from where you get your food, from where fresh air comes from where oxygen comes from all of the living things that are surrounding you. If you're so disconnected from them, then how can you develop any kind of sense of empathy, or love or passion for these things? Why would you want to be interested in protecting the tiger if you've never seen it or if you've never been to the forest? You don't know what you're missing, so you don't care. So I think there's definitely a very strong case to be made to make sure that young people, children especially, spend more time in nature at a young age so that they can learn to develop that sense of empathy, that sense of social justice, and appreciation for the natural world. And the other strong case I think it makes is that um, we need environment and sustainability and environmental topics to be a part of the educational curriculum, because teachers can be such a huge influence on young people. And if they are communicating this message, then it's good, especially if they're teaching young people uh, that they're teaching people not to be uh, money makers, right? Right now, all of our education is driven to what job will you get, how much money will you make, what resources will you get, how big of a house you can buy. All of these things are indicators of how well we're doing. And they're all incredibly important. I don't want to say that they're not. It would be very naive to say that they're not. But our education system should also prioritize what we're giving back to the community, how we behave as citizens, and that needs to be taught as a younger age. And so I think these are two big things that I would say definitely influenced me to get into this space. Yeah.
Right. And I agree with you on both of those fronts, right? When you were talking about integrating it into our curriculum to teach
Hmm.
about what we give back to the society, the what we produce as service to others, I think what that can also do is set up a mindset for being successful. If you see,
Yeah.
there are so many incredible people who have made it big in life by the terms of, by the definition of our society, and they have had these tendencies to be connected with others. They are good with people because they understand people's emotions, let's say, something like that. So these are all skills that nobody can teach better than nature, I'd say, because it teaches you that you're part of something bigger than yourself. It removes the it I'd say it removes the individuality from you, and yet it injects it inside you, right? Because
Yeah. Interesting.
yeah, because you're this tiny person who's riding a space rock in this giant expanse of nothingness, and that makes you feel like you are nothing, but you think that the fact that you're alive is a miracle. The chances of
Yeah.
you not being here are so much higher than chances of you being here, that you just have to think that you're here for a reason, and you have to figure that out. So
Yeah, I think, and it also it's a reflection of how you need to make an impact in your lifetime, right? Like, because that's the only opportunity you're ever going to have. Karma and like reincarnation or whatever aside, I don't know about any of those, but for me, this is it. This is my chance to make a difference, and so it's important to use that opportunity.
sure, makes sense. Yes, definitely. And uh, what would be some stories related to sustainability, conservation, or just anything in that space that really inspired you, or made you feel like this is why I'm working, and this is why I want to be in this space?
Uh, yeah, so like I said, one of the reasons I want to be in this space is because of the background that I've had. Um, I don't know if I can think of any specific stories. Like there's moments that I can think of, in college, when I was studying biology, I was as an undergraduate. I happened to come across this exhibit called Earth from Above, by a photographer called Jan Alfred Bertrand. That was it's a public exhibit, so there are these huge photographs that just get displayed in public spaces that are photographs of Earth taken from a height that show how human beings have changed landscapes. Um, it really got to me. I was looking at these images and just seeing how much of an impact that we've had and how often that impact has been negative. And it's one of the other reasons why at the time I was deciding what my master's course would be in, and it was one of the influencing factors for me in terms of, okay, I actually want to go into the environmental space because I want this impact to be positive, not negative. Again, I had another teacher in college who was teaching me conservation biology at the time. He was a big influence. He was so passionate about the subject that passion just comes through to you as well. So in my personal capacity, I guess, these are a couple of other small instances that have been influential. In a general sense, I think, I was talking about how it's important to ring that doomsday bell and get people aware of what's happening. But I also think it's important to, um, not get lost in this, uh, in these woods of like negative stories or negative things. Because at the end of the day, I think the most interesting thing to come out of this climate challenge is that we as a species, as human beings, have incredible potential to make a difference. And that for me is actually the most inspiring thing. It's the thing that keeps me going, right? Is that collectively we can have an incredible impact. And very often that impact has also been good. I mean, we were talking about things the quality of life that people had 50, 60 years ago. Today, we're in so much of a better place. People are living longer, they're living healthier, we have more access, we're more equitable, there's less war. All of these things are good things. In the 1990s, we were actually able to assess the ozone layer. When I was in school, the big issue was not climate change, it was the ozone hole. Today, it's almost a non-issue because it's something that we came together globally to address. And I feel that if that's something that we can do, then climate change is something that we can do as well. And so that I think is a hopeful message. And then the other thing is just the sheer amount of innovation. I have none of this, but there are so many other people who are coming up with exciting new solutions to the way we do things. There's a company in Hyderabad that's making concrete out of agricultural waste. There's somebody else who's looking at mushrooms as a resource to make packaging material instead of plastic. There are people who are doing all kinds of research into renewable energy technologies. How can we scale them up? How can we scale them down? How can we adjust them for a house? How can we make them for a city? There's people who are looking at green transportation, green chemistry. I think each one of those is an inspiring story, and we just need to open a newspaper, look at the news, and you'll find something. Because for all the people who are having a negative impact, there's actually hundreds of small stories about people having a positive impact. The small school has planted 300 trees in their backyard, or in Mumbai, there was the gentleman who was cleaning up the beach and did a beach cleanup for years, and motivated a whole community to come together to do the beach cleanup. I've forgotten his name, but there's a group called Marine Life in Mumbai that's looking at marine ecosystems and inspiring people about those. All of these are positive stories, and I think they keep me going because I know that there's hundreds of other people doing this. It's not just me on my own, and therefore collectively we can actually have an impact.
That's lovely. Yeah, I thank you so much. I got to learn so much. I never paid attention when it came to the environmental topics in school because uh, I'm being honest, because that used to bore me. I used to pay more attention when it came to geography or history. But
Yeah, I think education is best taught through action and not through textbooks.
exactly. When you write about what's climate change and you study it from the time you're in fifth grade till 10th grade, I mean, I think you get a bit used to it by the end. But thank you so much for coming, for enlightening us, and
You're most welcome, Adit. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
yeah, it's I'm gonna remember this conversation for a while because it cleared out a lot of uh, misconceptions in my mind. So
I'm
yeah,
glad.
it was great.